I hope everyone had a pleasant lunch, and in my opinion, it was delicious. It was really superb. So thank you, Plus Catering, for this fabulous lunch. And I also hope you all had time and possibility to explore around in the expo area and see something new and interesting. But now, let's get back to the presentations. So the next presentation is Digital Twins and Data Ecosystems, a perspective of Forum Virium Helsinki. And the speaker is Special Planner, Executive Officer of City of Helsinki, Lauri Lemmenlehti.
Thanks. Hi everybody. Is everybody feeling sleepy? I'm feeling a bit sleepy here. I hope nobody noticed, but kind of like that the title got changed here in between already. And what we're talking about today is the Greenery in digital twins moving into simulations. I work at the it's this one. Yeah. So I work at the City of Helsinki as a specialized planner. My specialization is really about natural environment digitalization. We have a data and new technologies team, and we had this small 3-person digital twin team there. My background is in landscape architecture and architecture, so I come from the planning scene. And this presentation is a little bit of this planning perspective, then natural environment, data management, and a little bit looking into the kind of like new technologies that are relating to this, with a strong emphasis on this natural environment perspective. Yeah. So Dominikas here from Vilnius talked nicely in the beginning about this issue of what the digital twin is. And within our team, the team has been working since the early 80s already. I was talking to the kind of like senior expert in our team. So where would he put the start of this kind of like the current digital 3D development of urban modeling in general? He said it's 86 that he considers is the first place when it happened. So in a kind of like couple of years, we're going to have a kind of like the 80th birthday party already. So that's really nice. But kind of like when I try to consider like digital twin as a term is thrown out so much that it's kind of like hard to, say what it is really. Like there's quite a lot of definitions on it. But kind of like listening to the kind of like more senior experts in our team, they really like, oh yeah, well this is the new thing. This is like what we're doing now, but this is kind of like continuation of kind of like what we've been doing here for already a while now. And I've been trying to think like, okay, like when I'm like in 2030 or 2035, when I'm going to start looking back, what will I tell about this kind of like beginning of the 20s to kind of like maybe junior experts in our team? And for me, it at least looked like that, yes, it is part of this 3D modeling timeline, but the amount of data that came available, that there was kind of like multiple different technologies that came to the market, and there was so much of that information that we needed to align also temporally within the 3D model of the city to make sense of it and kind of like really use it. So that's kind of like from the natural environment modeling perspective, that's kind of like what I've been thinking about it. So kind of like looking at the general problematism of well, there's quite a lot of, I've just kind of like picked a few here. But when we do these kind of like 3D models of the city, and we try to remember that kind of like they're very, very complex 3D objects. Their function and their informational value changes and develops within time. The individuals, the plants, are dependent on where they actually grow. And we have a really hard time we do a lot of trees because they're easily understandable. You can kind of like recognize what is an individual plant. But when you start having groups and messy and they grow together, it's kind of like hard to make sense. So we have a tendency to model those that we are easily understand. To address this kind of like vegetation modeling, you have to have kind of like some perspective of time, and the more precise you have, the better you're going to be served. And at the same time, that when we go into this digital twin world, where we try to get into this really individual plant level, we try to remember that it's the ecology in the cities are provided by the individuals, but it's the networks that actually matter. So if you're really going to go into this kind of like theme of vegetation, urban greenery, and digital twins, you would have to kind of like be able to answer to these few questions. So what do you have? Where is it? And when is it? So if I just kind of like go through these three issues a bit. So when we have a lot of kind of like different vegetations, we have different species of them. They're local. So we are close by with the cities of Helsinki and Tallinna, so we can create a lot of these models, we can create the information, and we can use them together. But for example, if we go to northern Italy, there's going to be more species available further, kind of like closer you go to the equator. But the species, they will be different. So you will kind of like have to, if you want to go into precise vegetation modeling, you have to have local species. To implement this kind of like growth and the development and the change of the things, you have to model them algorithmically, so rule-based. What's really great about the vegetation is that they follow rules, which makes it a bit easier. And then, of course, like I said, trees are easy to understand, and of course they kind of like create a big bulk of the urban ecology, and they're kind of like very effective in what they do. But then there's kind of like the whole world under the foliage, which is kind of like large parts of the whole urban ecosystems. So consider bushes, shrubs, vines. You have to address these issues too. Then, well, where? This goes into the kind of like more traditional GIS world. But like I said before, these are messy. Vegetation is messy. So there was kind of like from England, there was kind of like the good example of the cables going underground. So kind of like having an image of a kind of like Syrian natural environment that works. It's really, really messy. So that's kind of like one thing that has to be dealt with, and we have to consider this, like, let's try to model those individuals that we can, and where it's pragmatic, let's try to kind of like do the groups, but we would have to not just look at those things as informational blobs. That's the worst thing for modeling. Then kind of like considering this location, so they are very kind of like much affected by their environment. So depending on the soil quality, what sort of nutrients, how much do you have light, what sort of wind, well, the general like microclimatic questions, they will affect the plant. But this is of course like that vegetation estimation of their growth actually kind of like would benefit very much out of these digital twins if we can kind of like bring these different attributes into the urban digital twin. But kind of like just in the recent past couple of years, we've started to see these what would you call these plug-in programs, these third-party services that kind of like facilitate this GIS data integration into different platforms, like Cesium, like ArcGIS, and of course, like now this week there was a big happening since Bentley bought Cesium out, so there's a lot of movement in this field right now. And then the when. Let's see. Does it start? Can you manually put the video on from there? Not this one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Does it? Yeah, it's on. So generally, like like considering vegetation and modeling in urban, you kind of like there's the three scales that I like to talk about in considering this how would you model vegetation? Is this daily level? Then there's the seasonal level. Of course, considering the different seasons. Here in the north, those seasons really matter. And then this kind of like annual growth modeling. And since what basically happens in winter, so plants grow during the summer season, and then they kind of like, if they don't die for the winter season, then they will kind of like go to sleep and continue after that. But this is kind of like, if you want to plan anything with vegetation within the cities here in the north, because I have a tendency to think that it's like, because when the weather is like this, like what we have now, everything's great, nothing kind of like everything's fun, but you should, in my opinion, really plan for this weather. So if you can make the city function nicely at the end of November 15th at 7 o'clock in the evening, then you've succeeded. Does it? It goes. Can you start the video? I don't know. It just kind of like keeps on going. Yeah. So basically, this vegetation information management enhancement, what we're trying to do is kind of like giving quite a lot of different opportunities. Of course, kind of like higher level planning analysis. So like I said, you start to kind of like be able to consider really the different seasons, kind of like the weather that comes, kind of like really get into this to the atmosphere we have in the cityscapes. And how will they develop during kind of like the years and coming years. The other one is kind of like providing this larger or contextual frame for planning. So at least in Helsinki, what I have noticed is that we have vegetation information scattered around from different parts of the city, but they're often limited by these administrational limits. And by developing and connecting these vegetation networks and the geographic information that we have of the species, we can automatize the understanding to the actual urban planner of kind of like what kind of species should we put in places so it would kind of like actually support and fortify the existing vegetation networks. The other thing is that this if you want what you see here in the video, this is kind of like taken from this participational planning software that we did a few years back. and it's a game engine technology. This was built on Unity, but when you jump from this building information modeling and city GML world out into these 3D creation engines, Unity, Unreal, etc., you actually get into this into the kind of like much more specific temporality, but then you get access to these different participational levels. So you can actually do these very easily computer game type of things that people can use. You can build augmented reality apps. You can build virtual reality apps. So it kind of like gives quite a lot of opportunities in that sense. There's a few roadblocks while I've been doing these works that I just kind of like wanted to kind of like show you here. So one important thing is that when you start building these 3D models of vegetation, is that you could align the building of the models not just on the shape, but on the actual scientific, natural science data of what we have literature, of what we have research on. So that we would have a sense that as the knowledge of the vegetation, how it behaves, how it develops, grows, that we would have a pipeline to really implement those into the 3D models. Considering this, some of these kind of like tools and softwares that we have in use are trying to really fit the vegetation, like the needs of the vegetation models into the kind of like ready-made blocks that are meant and were designed for buildings. And I've used this kind of like word that if you're working with a hammer, every screw is going to look like a nail. And what we need to do is try to figure out, like, not make the information fit the platform where you go, but develop the platform to support the information that we need to acquire from the models. And then as the last one, this kind of like that relates into this kind of like county and city level bureaucracies. Getting software, getting hardware, getting licenses to people that might be expensive, kind of like can really hinder these operations when you kind of like have to combine a lot of different layers and stages together, and really kind of like trying to solve this is kind of like have always a kind of like a little eye into like how feasible is it like relating to these hardware needs and software requirement needs. So the issue, like you've seen, and what I've tried to tell you here is that how we look at it in our digital twin team is that if you want to model vegetation, you basically have to root it into some stable information, and from that information you can export different level of details out. And in our case, when you look at the, do I have yeah. So this kind of like planning category here, which includes BIM, and this is kind of like including city GML level of building. This is already, and when you export these into softwares like Enscape or Twinmotion, which are basically very limited game engines, you can actually kind of like create very easily understandable and light level simulations. And this is kind of like in Helsinki, this has been applied already kind of like since last year within the urban planning scheme. and this kind of like this end where we would like to go eventually is perhaps closer to this kind of like ideal digital twin, where you can actually harvest unknown information from kind of like gathering all the data here. So here in Tallinna, Tallinna Technical University, there's Finest Center, and Helsinki City was a part of Green Twins research project that was ongoing from 21 until 23. And coming out of that research, we had a small product development operation that produced this herbarium.ai service that basically now answers to these questions. So it provides it provides the stable information library with the models with different level of detail, so more like CityGML model, or kind of like these high graphical level models with seasonality and kind of like low level of simulations that can be integrated into the GIS system, city modeling and urban planning pipeline. Also, this platform that's Unity based has been built in a way that it can be pixel streamed, so basically streamed from a cloud server to be used on kind of like any browser without this kind of like needs to have any hardware limitations or kind of like GPUs that you would traditionally need. So considering this, a few steps that we have kind of like coming up is really, like I said, at least in Helsinki, the data that we have on vegetation, on the greenery in general, is often developed from a perspective that you have, like, let's say, street tree safety maintenance. But always the kind of like data is built from a kind of like perspective of those specific needs. And what we would really need is a kind of like universal data structure for vegetation. Then what you saw before there is kind of like this continuously updated vegetation information library that provides information, 3D models, and references. So that whatever the system that you're going to use in the digital twin model, but you could kind of like pinpoint, like, okay, this species is that data point here, or this you can connect those, and this is kind of like important to have these points anchored when you're doing this. But sort of like the end goal of this is, of course, like vegetation is just part, like the bigger picture is modeling urban ecology in digital twins. And vegetation is just basically a backbone. Of course, there's a lot of different layers, but if you're going to have trouble in modeling even vegetation, then it's hard to move ahead from there. And for the kind of like for the sort of like short-term stuff that we're doing now in Helsinki, is we're talking quite a lot all the time about like integrating different sources of mapping. So not only having this centralized where Helsinki does everything, but kind of like really participate the public to the collection of these, having maybe third party, like let's say robot food deliveries that are kind of like collecting urban data all the time. Can we use that to actually map the vegetation? Then understanding that the vegetation doesn't really care about your administrational limits. So So you have to kind of like be able to like cross borders within the cities, then in between cities and counties, but also between countries. And we've been lucky enough here in between Estonia and Finland to do this between Helsinki and Tallinn. So kind of like this is smart to do together if you can share the resources here. And like you saw in the video, the kind of like the XR technologies that come through these game engine technologies or 3D creation technologies are kind of like very good in creating better communications and creating these tools for data harvesting. Are they, public officials? Are they private companies? Are they kind of like citizens? But the technology naturally comes from there. And as there in the final picture, this was just kind of like from last month. So the Finnish Center is having this root system modeling project. So now we're not just looking for trees, just kind of like to have the species right over ground, but then going underground. And we're quite interested of kind of like of the conflicts that come with the kind of like tree roots and the underground urban infrastructure. So that's a thing to look at. That's my presentation for today. Thank you.
Since we have a couple of minutes now, then does anybody have any questions for Lauri? Oh, one there. Wait, I'll give you a microphone as well. Oh.
Well, first of all, very good presentation. Thank you very much. What I really loved about was this one thing that if you manage to make your environment look nice after 7 p.m. After 15th of November or so, this is something I have thought also a lot about when I see those free renderings of the urban plans and so on. They're always like extremely beautiful summer weather, but yeah, we are not in the environment where this is all a year situation. But how is this kind of like attitude adopted like in the municipality who's responsible for urban planning and also among the urban planners? Like, is this something that we might, this kind of like change of all these visuals and renderings to also offer this kind of like visual, how it would look in the down season time?
I think what we are feeling now, like this discussion over the visualizations and that the price of producing this kind of like graphical level is kind of like has fallen quite a lot. And I think like the more we provide of these like winter scenes and nice examples of kind of like working winter scenes, people start to expect like, hey, like you're not going to give me the nice summer, everything's great picture anymore. And just this kind of like barrage of kind of like good looking imagery that came also with the large language model, like image processing, like my sense is that we can, like the expectation of the people will start to push. So politicians are now asking for like real videos. And once we get kind of like high quality graphics all the time, I think we're not gonna start falling anymore to this kind of like just it's a good looking picture. And I think what's gonna happen, it's gonna take a little bit of time, but that we still have a tendency that if something looks good, it must be a good plan. And I don't know if it's going to work like this, but I hope that when people get this kind of like skill to read images better and connect those to planning and connect to the communications that the planners do, the quality will go eventually up. But the one thing is that we need to be able to produce the visual material that shows the winter time, that shows the bad times of the year.
Okay.
Thank you. Looking forward to this time.
Okay. Let's give another round of applause to Lauri.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can ask more questions from him during the coffee break. But now let's move on to the next presentation.